My name is Máximo Torero. I am the Chief Economist of FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. In 2019, we have 690 million people undernourished, 10 million people more than the previous year, and 60 million people more than 5 years ago. At the same time, 2 billion people couldn't access regular diets, and 3 billion people couldn't have access to healthy diets. And all this even before COVID-19. What this means is that we are off path and off track of achieving SDG 2. And this is, of course, before COVID-19. At FAO, we have been trying to analyze and understand what are the drivers behind what is happening in terms of undernourishment. And we have identified 4 core drivers that affect the levels of undernourishment. The first one is climate variability and extremes. The second one is conflict. The third one is economic slowdowns. And the fourth one is surprises, unexpected events, like the case of COVID-19, which affect the sector and affect the levels of undernourishment substantially. Why climate is so important? Because agriculture happens in rural areas, and it depends on weather. Most of the agriculture of smallholders is based on rainfall, and is based on temperatures. So any extreme situation, any increase in variability of temperatures will affect farmers, and the effect will vary depending on how vulnerable you are to weather. And the picture you have seen, the graph you can see, is a graph that shows the level of undernourishment and how it correlates to different levels of exposure to climate. The dotted line represents the lower levels of exposure, while all the other colored lines represent the higher levels of exposure. And as you can see, the more the exposure, the higher the levels of undernourishment. The second element is conflict and civil unrest. We have seen a significant increase in the level of conflict in the last years, but we also have seen an increase in the complexity of the type of conflict. And more than half of the people that are undernourished live in countries starting with some form of conflict. So conflict has become one of the major causes behind the increase of the levels of undernourishment. And that's something that we need to think carefully because it's very complex to solve. The third element is economic recessions and slowdowns. This is another great threat to hunger, irrespective of whether it is the result of market swings, trade wars, political unrest, or global pandemics, such as the COVID-19. Most of countries where hunger has increased have experienced economic slowdowns or recessions. And the figure shows the countries that experience an increase in hunger with economic slowdowns and downturns. And out of 77 countries that experience a rise in hunger, 65 saw an economic slowdown or contraction. So economic slowdowns and downturns challenge access to food, as they often led to rises of unemployment, as we are observing today, for example, with the case of COVID-19. So people's access to food will be affected. It could be that food is available, but the access will be the one affected. Finally, the effect of surprise, COVID-19. So what will happen? FAO has been working intensively in trying to understand and simulate what will be the numbers of undernourishment in 2020 as a result of COVID-19. And our estimations show that the numbers could increase between 83 to 132 million people of undernourishment by 2020. This means that by 2030, we could be around 900 million people undernourished, very far from our SDG 2 target. And that's because of this surprise, COVID-19. And this is also the result of a recession. We are going to face a significant recession. GDP at the world level is going to decline in minus 4.9% according to the IMF. And all countries in the world are going through a deep recession. As a result, this will increase the numbers of poverty to more than 100 million people moving into extreme poverty. A decade will be lost. And that, of course, has a correlate in the levels of undernourishment. That's why our prediction that we will have up to 132 million people moving into undernourishment. Now, the other major concern is that all these drivers also help to one thing, increase of inequalities. And that's something that we need to worry, because the only way we can move households, individuals out of poverty in a sustainable way is by reduction of inequality. And what we are observing in all these drivers is that we increase inequality. Even in COVID-19, we expect a significant increase of inequality, not only between developed and developed countries, but also within countries. The ones who have access more to assets will be able to cope better. The ones with less access to assets will be able to cope less. Therefore, this could even exacerbate more the situation and make it less sustainable for the future. So what this means, we are in this environment that, as this map can show, we cannot access to healthy diets. That means that households don't have capacity to afford healthy diets. 3 billion people cannot afford healthy diets, and most of them are in Africa, as you can see in the dark red shaded areas of the sub-Saharan Africa continent. Around 75 to 100% of the people cannot afford a healthy diet. So we're in a deep trouble situation, and we need to find a solution. And the only way we can find a solution is to transform the food systems. And to be able to be efficient and gain opportunities, take COVID-19 as a way to obtain opportunities to build back better. And the only way we can do that is to target better the most vulnerable, to find innovative ways to target them, to provide more employment, but more employment through public works programs that will help at the same time to build infrastructure that will be linked to productive sectors. We need also to reactivate economies. We need also to help smallholders to integrate and have access to markets. We need to increase trade, because trade increases efficiency of allocation of resources, but especially we need to increase intra-regional trade. Why? Because that's a huge opportunity to cope with the recession. Africa, for example, has enormous potential of intra-regional trade, and they already have agreed into reduction of tariffs within the region. But the major problem today is infrastructure and non-tariff barriers. Infrastructure will require investment, but non-tariff barriers will also require an improvement on the food safety measures. And that's why we need to set up initiatives like the Pan-African Food Safety Agency to be able to accelerate the process. But clearly, to be able to cope with the pandemic that we're coping today and the fragility of our work, we have to make our food systems, agri-food systems, more resilient. But we have to start today to reform our food systems, to transform them into more efficient food systems and inclusive, efficient food systems, to promote global value chains which are inclusive, to reduce food loss and waste, to increase the resilience to weather, and to be able to give what farmers need to be able to have a system in which they operate, which is more resilient. GAF-FSP plays a crucial role on this. And I hope with the support of GAF-FSP, we can target better investments to create the change that is needed so that we don't face the same number of undernourished people in the future, and that we can afford and achieve SDG 2. Thank you very much.